Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show.
I'm Alex Smyth, coming to you from the Odin 2022 conference. I am joined by Dr. Jennifer Crowson, the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist with Odin. Dr. Crowson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a bit about your session today and what was the topic?
Sure. So my session was around employment as a goal, engaging with families. And where it, what informed the session, I guess you could say, is the research that I've been doing with the Ontario Disability Employment Network on the youth success strategy.
And so why do you want to include families in terms of setting employment as a goal? Why is that a key and a focus for your session?
It's a really good question. And part of what I talked about in that session is about how, we have to start early. And that early starts at home, right? So it starts not just with the attitudes that parents, caregivers have in terms of what their child's future might look like, but also about what they're going to encourage their child to do at home. So I'm talking chores, I'm talking all these things that we talk about and we know, but sometimes children with disabilities, particularly those with developmental disabilities, which is what my research focused on, they get left out of those conversations and left out of those expectations. And what I'm saying is that we need to change that. We need to change that way of thinking.
And so building those routines, those skills at home at a younger age can be key for employment later?
Absolutely. That's 100% what was one of the messages of my session. The other thing that I really talked about was this, how families, and I speak to this as a parent of a child with a disability, that we are told really early on that your child will probably not achieve. We're not told to have high expectations for our children who have disabilities. And so one of the messages that I give in that workshop is we need to rethink that narrative. We need to try and encourage parents to see the ability in their child, versus what they can't do. And I hope that I am not making it sound like that's just what parents think. Parents are told, by people who think they know what they're talking about when to raise a child with a disability, that your child will not do this, your child will not do that. So what, of course, your reaction is going to be as a parent, right? So we're trying to challenge that way of thinking in our session.
Do you feel like the messaging or the philosophy is changing at all around, trying to get those with disabilities into the workforce that you're talking about? Like, this is some of the messaging that you've received and other parents have received. Has it changed at all in the past 10, 15, 20 years?
Yes, I think it has changed, but I think it's changed because of conferences like this, because of conversations that are happening here. But that dominant narrative that surrounds the lives of people with disabilities still needs to shift. Right? And that dominant narrative is really informing how parents are told about their child and how they're told to think about their child's future, how the education system is embedded in the education system. It doesn't allow for our young people with developmental disabilities to have the same experiences as their peers, and that connects to employment. Right?
Is there a specific area that you would say, okay, this is where the most work needs to be done? Is it education? Is it somewhere else?
Oh, it's everywhere. But it's everywhere. But in education in particular, so one of the things I talk about in my workshop is, for example, we expect all high school students in Ontario to complete 40 hours of volunteer service in order to get their high school diploma. We don't expect that of young people with developmental disabilities because we don't expect them to get their high school diploma. No. We need to rethink that because we know from volunteer experience you learn communication skills, you learn responsibility, you learn community involvement. So we need our young people all to have that experience. We know that young people with developmental disabilities are not given the same access to co-op and to paid summer jobs and those things that you probably had when you were a young person, right? And it helps you get a job as an adult. Young people with developmental disabilities need the same.
What does the conference offer up in terms of a benefit to have all these different organizations, all these different groups in one place at the same time? Now, obviously, this is also the first time that we've been able to gather in a few years, but so what does it mean to have all these different voices and all these different activists here together?
Well, everybody here, I think, really believes that people with disabilities deserve a place in employment, right? So we are all on the same page, but we are here to network and to share ideas. So certainly in my session this morning, I heard from people who were like, yes, we agree with what you're saying, Jennifer. Here's some things that we've done in our community to think about what you are saying. So there's that kind of networking ability. There's a kind of inspiring. We're inspiring each other to go back to our communities and to spread the messages that we're creating here at this conference.
Now, the information and the strategies that you've been talking about, this isn't just based on anecdotal, there's also research and
Yes.
evidence behind it. Can you talk a bit about that research?
Yeah, so last year, so in 2021, I did a piece of research for Odin, and we call it the Youth Success Strategy. So what I did, what I was interested in is what is it about programs that support young people who have barriers to employment. So disability could be one of those, but we know there are intersectional, barriers that people face to employment. What was it about their programs that were successful? And what was it about their programs that were more challenging? And what were they identifying? So I spoke with employment service providers in Ontario, in Manitoba, Quebec, and in Ireland, actually, which was kind of fun. I didn't actually get to go to Ireland.
Okay.
It was on Zoom, but anyways. So what did I find? I found that attitudes really had an impact, So what they were saying is they may get a 17, 18, 19-year-old young person with a developmental disability coming to their program, but that young person wasn't coming with the same skill set as their peers. So for example, they didn't have soft employment skills.
Yeah.
So communication, kind of knowing how to dress to come into to work, transportation. They didn't have those things that you would get if you'd had somebody who had the expectations that you would do these things if you'd had experiences in school. They weren't coming with the same literacy skills. Literacy is something that is challenging for everybody, and literacy looks different for everybody. But what I was saying in my research is that we need to find different ways of allowing people to access the literacy that is for them. Right? We can't just write off and say, well, sorry, you have a developmental disability, you can't read. Well, rethink that. So thinking outside of the box, lots of different things.
Now, this may be a bit of a loaded question, but do you see the future as bright for kind of changing the narrative, the perspectives, and building a more inclusive environment where people with disabilities can get the same level of education, resources, and employment?
Yes, because I'm an optimist, right? But I think it's going to take hard work, and it's going to take a community effort, and it's going to take a village, right? So it's going to mean we need to think differently about how we talk to parents when they first learn their child is going to have a disability. It starts there. Then when they go to elementary school, are we making sure that that elementary school is fully inclusive? Then when they go to secondary school, are we making sure that they are being invited to, participate in the academic curriculum and not asked to sit over in the corner, right? Then when they leave school, are they going to have the same opportunities to have summer jobs? So are we then going to have employers who are going to recognize the benefit of being an inclusive hirer? So there's so many elements to this future that I know is being created by the people who are at this conference, but I'm optimistic, certainly I have a son who has a developmental disability, and certainly by the time he's an adult, I'm optimistic that he will have a job and he will live independently.
That's awesome, and that's great to hear. Now, for other parents at home who may be in a similar situation, where can they go to try to find more information or maybe access some resources?
So they can get in touch with Odin, because we have this research which gets shared. Now we don't typically hear from parents, to be fair, but the research that I did, we did create into webinars, and over the course of the last year, we delivered that webinar to school boards. We did one session for the Canadian Down Syndrome Society. We did a session for CanChild. So we are trying to push this message out there so that it can have a wider audience, right? Because it's parents and caregivers, but it's also educators. It's also employment service providers. We want everybody to carry the same message.
That's awesome. Dr. Jennifer Crowson, thank you so much for taking time, chat with me a bit about this. It's such an important issue, so I'm glad we could chat about it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me and allowing me to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.